All right. Yeah. So everybody has to say got it or something.
Got it.
So we have a special treat today. We have Nancy Hirshbein as our guest and talk about diversity of experiences. And Nancy's not an artist maker herself, but she knows more about art than probably many of us combined, if not all of us combined. And she describes herself as an art evangelist, and you'll hear about why. She's an arts collector, a docent at national museums around the Smithsonian. So, and so many other things. I don't want to go through them, but we'll hear wonderful and very varied perspectives from her. And I'm really thrilled that we can have her on. So I'm hoping that it'll be quite interactive. So prepare questions. Think about questions as Nancy's talking. And if I'm not mistaken, she welcomes interruptions.
Absolutely.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nancy. And if you want, you can go ahead and share your screen.
Well, first, let me thank you for the invitation. Thank Linda again for making the connection, and for all of you for your patience, because there's kind of an element of chutzpah that I feel that I'm here talking to people who are artists about your experience as artists, and not meaning to be presumptuous, but everything that I've been doing over the past few years has been because of people like you, and my appreciation for people like you who are the creators and the makers. So I was invited to speak with you this morning about my experience as an advocate for the arts, not just the arts in general, but for the artists in the DC area, the DMV. I'm going to talk a little bit about that evolution in consciousness, how I came to understand that we have a very vibrant and healthy arts ecosystem here in DC, and what made me such an enthusiast in terms of wanting to support in whatever ways that I could that ecosystem. So I put together some slides, and they're really just in the nature of prompts to remind me, kind of chronologically of how this evolution in terms of my interests took place. So I'm going to share my screen. Do you all see the
Yes.
Okay. So the first question that Mariana asked me was, how did this all get started? And there is an origin story for how this interest that I had in the arts got started. And it got started, as Mariana mentioned when some of you first logged in Barcelona, of all places. So I was on a trip to Barcelona with my husband. It was our wedding anniversary, and always go visit museums. We went to one, which is the Museum of Contemporary Art, MACBA. And as we're walking through, came to an installation that looked like some kind of dead trees that were in a little forest planted in the middle of the museum. And I looked at my husband and I said, I don't understand this at all. What the heck is this? Fortunately, there was accompanying in the gallery a booklet, like a whole little booklet, many pages, explaining what the artist's intentions were in creating the installation. And I sat down and I read the booklet, and it took that in order for me to understand that there was this whole area of art that I knew nothing about, but yearned to know more. where it wasn't about the appearance of the art so much. It wasn't about beauty. It wasn't about anything that I had come to understand as what art meant. And it was literally at that moment, I can remember it still, the feeling of saying to myself, I'm just gonna spend my days learning about this whole area of art and contemporary art, because it was like a philosophical puzzle, and I love puzzles. So coming back to DC, I tried to volunteer for some museums, because I thought that that would be a way to complete my education or further my education. And at first I volunteered at the Phillips Collection and the Textile Museum. I didn't mention that to you, Mariana, because I forgot that I volunteered at both those places for years until I was able to complete a training to volunteer at the Smithsonian and to volunteer at the National Gallery, because both of those trainings are pretty extensive. And when I started at the Hirshhorn, it wasn't as a docent. It was as one of those people sitting at the desk who tell you where the bathroom is. And that was still just being in that environment, surrounded by the art and able to ask the curators questions. And because it's a small museum at the Hirshhorn, and you really do get to know everybody. Not so much at the National Gallery, that's a huge organization, but what's neat about the National Gallery is when you volunteer there, the learning opportunities, honestly, it's like having access to a free master's in art history, because there's something for the volunteers almost every week, and it is required that you attend. Now we're doing so virtually, and they record it, but at that time it was show up in person, but it was always a pleasure, and it still is. So after, volunteering at the desk at the Hirshhorn for however many years, it was they who encouraged me to become a docent. And I did. The first exhibition that I docented for was this one. I don't know if any of you saw it. Robert Irwin. And what the heck are you looking at? This was such a pleasure for me, because you see something that's puzzling, and the artist himself is deeply immersed in a philosophical practice, which is pure joy for me. Robert Irwin, still living. He's in his 90s. He's what's called California Light and Space. You may have heard of James Turrell. He and Irwin were actual artistic partners for a while. Irwin had a major retrospective at the Hirshhorn, which, as retrospectives do, an overview of his entire career to that point. And taking visitors through this exhibition where the artist was asking you to stop and really interrogate your perceptions, how it is, not just what you see, but how it is that you see what you see, and the feeling of the space. Mariana asked me, were there works of art that I can point to that are examples of art that really drew me in? Well, you can think about the Robert Irwin exhibition as one example of that. But ta-da, Barbara, we had works by Marcel Duchamp at the Hirshhorn for a while. They were gifts of two local collectors, the Barbara Levine and her husband, whose name just went out of my head, Aaron. So what you see is the only surviving, no, not the only surviving photograph, the most famous surviving photograph of one of Duchamp's works called Fountain. And if you came to see the Marcel Duchamp show at the Hirshhorn and had my tour, you would have heard me going on forever about Duchamp's influence on contemporary art. He really was the father of conceptual art, paving the way for so much of what we understand today as the potential of art, not just as a retinal experience of what the eye sees, but the experience of, of art as a philosophical proposition. And the influence that Duchamp has had on the trajectory of art history, when they did a poll a few years ago of artists, asking them to name the most influential artist of the 20th century, or actually, yeah, it was the 20th century. Marcel Duchamp was the winner. And not everybody's heard of him, which was a wonderful experience for me as taking, a group through the galleries to introduce this artist. And the thing that I adored about the exhibition was the questions that it raised among the visitors about what is art. Because when this sculpture that you see was presented in 1917, it was rejected as not being art. And it went away until the 1940s. We never saw it again. Well, this version that you see was destroyed. No one knew that Marcel Duchamp was the creator. No one knew that Marcel Duchamp was the creator until the 1940s. But anyway, an aside. So the questions that the visitors raised about what is art, and they would always, and they still do, raise that question as, kind of shyly. And I thank them for raising it, because it gives us the opportunity to talk about a really wonderful subject. What is art? I defy anyone to come up with a comprehensive answer to that question. You really can't. So we fall back on the proposition from Marcel Duchamp himself that anything the artist presents as art is art. It may be crappy art, you may hate it, but it's art. So as you could see, I fell down the rabbit hole with Marcel Duchamp. I had my library, my art book library has shelves and shelves of books by and about him. And the other piece, and this is still up at the Hirshhorn, that I gave to Mariana as an example of a work that has drawn me in. This is a detail from a very large installation called Pickett's Charge by the artist Mark Bradford, Mark Bradford, still living. He's 61 or 62. He's out in California. He has his studio in Los Angeles. And he was invited to create a commission for the Hirshhorn, and he did, with this world's most giant collage called Pickett's Charge. What drew me in about this work was the conversation that the artist was having about the nature of American history and about history in general. And that's something that really intrigues me. So in addition to all the ways that the different methods that he employed in creating this work, excuse me, what a challenge it was. But the thesis that he's presenting about American history, and there's a message here. The opportunities that has given us collectively to think about the nature of history. And he was really prescient, because you all know that school boards all over the country are literally fighting about what we teach and how we teach it of American history. And this is exactly the sort of question that the artist was thinking about as he created this work. So how did I start being interested in local artists? You're going to be hearing in this series from my dear Otto Rose Bitterbaum, who has a gallery in Kensington. And as we started thinking about art, my husband and I, and the idea of maybe owning some art ourselves, Otto Rose was a very generous giver of her time to help us figure out what we were looking at, different types of art. She does have the work from a lot of DC area artists. She arranged for us to go and have some studio visits, which I never knew that you could do, and enjoyed it so much. I didn't really even realize until looking at this now, this image, that we own something in this this photograph, the view of Venice that you see on the bottom. We have that.
Anna Rose is actually our speaker next, or actually in 2 weeks.
Yeah, she's great. She's just such a lovely person. And if you've never visited her gallery, I encourage everyone to do so. So she was kind of our entree to art collecting and getting to know DC area artists. And that was the kind of aha moment. And I even made an aha moment here. Ta-da! Ta-da! Of what can we do to support local artists? Well, you could support local artists by buying their work. I mean, if someone is trying to make a living as an artist, you buy their work. And that was like just it. We're fortunate that we can do that. And it's something that we could do to make a difference. Lyndon knows this, that I started, well, we'll get to that. This little quote that you see here, I'll let you look at it for a moment. Are you all done reading? So when Mariana first saw this in my slideshow, she didn't know why it was here. And she thought I was saying, go out and buy art from Target or Walmart, just the opposite. This is a quote from an article that was in the living section of the Post. Every once in a while, they have these articles by a decorator or someone about how to hang art, how to live with art. And they'll say things like, buy it online. And it just kills me, because you can get original art by someone living here in DC, in the DC area, that's you're going to love, and that you're going to be able to form a relationship with the artist, often at the same price point or close to it that you will be paying for something from Target or IKEA or West Elm, what have you. And this is where I was going, arranging studio visits. I was enjoying studio visits, so I started inviting friends to join me in those expeditions. And one of the folks was Lynn Myers. I don't know if you know her. She has her studio. She lives and works in DC. This is a painting on the left that she's talking about. And what you see on the right is a print, a fine art print of one of her works, actually one that we own. It was an edition of 20. And when Mariana and I were talking about this conversation, this topic of fine art printmaking came up, and the role of works on paper in the arts ecosystem, and certainly as a collector. One of Lynn's paintings can go for $100,000. Now, that's not in my range. Yeah, her work is owned by museums all over the world. She's got work at the National Gallery, Phillips Collection, just every museum you could think of, including the British Museum, which isn't even an art museum, but they recently acquired one of her paintings. But her works on paper, you can buy a print of hers for much less. So like an edition, the one that we see on the right, I think was an edition of 20. And it was printed, the publisher was Flying Horse Press or whatever, I think. And it is a combination of screen print and engraving, I believe, multi process print. And it is as much an original work of art as a painting, only it happens to exist in 20 units. And there's variation among them, because as it comes out of the press, the only type of printing in which there's no variation is what's now called digital printing, digital printmaking, which is a way of saying that it's a very high quality copy made on a machine, like a Xerox machine, a digital printer. What you see on the right is something else. I have nothing against digital prints, but if you're going to start delving into that form of art making, you'll know that there are a lot of different ways to make prints, and some of them are more technically complicated than others. And it's also why digital prints can be much cheaper. So anyway, studio visits. We were doing them I was doing them quite frequently before we had to stop for the pandemic, and haven't arranged studio visits for a group yet since then, but I hope to get back to that. what you see on the right are some of the works that we own. That corner has changed a little bit. Things have been rehung. But except for one piece, I think they are all DC and Baltimore artists, including one by Lynn. People would always ask me, and they still do, how do I find out about art in the DC area? We're getting on a lot of mailing lists, but I use Instagram a lot to know what's going on, and I follow a lot of artists on Instagram. And here, like, this is an actual copy of a resource piece of paper that I handed out and used in a previous presentation that I did on art collecting. Montgomery College actually has a class on art collecting, and I was one of their guest speakers. As you can see, there's a lot. And if anyone wants this piece of paper, I can share it with you and even fill in some of the websites for you. So I've also gotten involved in some local organizations. I'm on the board of the Washington Print Club, and this is just the homepage of their website. This is a group that encourages collecting of works on paper. Many of the members are artists who do works on paper, including photography, collage, not just printmaking. But we are starting a new initiative, reaching out to what we are calling emerging collectors. You know, you've heard of emerging artists. Well, emerging collectors too. We're not exactly sure what that means, but it's, if you think you're an emerging collector, you're an emerging collector. So the Washington Print Club sponsors all the kinds of activities that I like. We go behind the scenes at museums, we meet with curators, and we visit a lot of artist studios. So I became involved with this first as a member, and then was invited to join the board. In addition to arranging studio visits, I also work toward putting together artist talks at different venues. And this was a talk, the artist Tim Dowd, he's right here. This was with the Washington Print Club, and it was at the Katzen Center. And what you see on the right-hand side is a work by Tim. This is a print. It was an edition of 20. I'm sorry, there's a little glare here. But Tim is principally a painter. He's newly represented by Hemp Hill Gallery, but he also works, like a lot of artists do, with making prints as a way to just broaden his practice and also experiment with different techniques, see what happens. So the work that you see on the right looks kind of collage-y, but it started as a painting, or the idea for a painting, and then it evolved into a print. Tim has an abiding interest in fabric and clothing as representation of individuals. Like, this could be a portrait of someone. So these don't start as, they look like little bits of fabric, but it was all painted or drawn. For a while, about a year and a half, I was on the board of Stable. I don't know if you all have heard of that. It is a nonprofit in DC that has below market studio space. I think there are currently 30 artists working at Stable, as well as a gallery. And I was doing talks, or putting together talks for Stable when I was on the board working on programs. And this was a program that I had envisioned called Art Relish to accomplish what my goal was to encourage people to become more just comfortable with the idea of collecting art, getting to know artists, visiting art galleries, and in general, just demystifying the art world. I'm no longer on the board at Stable. We talked earlier about Docent. This is another initiative that I started during the pandemic. And it was an completely informal, I don't even know what to call it. It's not an organization, just a group of us from the Hirshhorn 10 docents who offered free one-on-one or group conversations about contemporary art. And it took off. We had conversations with people all over the world. I literally, Tasmania, or, I am just literal when I say around the world. It was very time consuming during the pandemic. It's really just kind of tapered off a whole lot now that people are able to go back to museums. But it was another way that we could talk about art and share our love for art. And I met so many people doing this. And it was interesting how many in our audience were docents from other places who don't have a contemporary art collection. And so even for docents and people immersed in the art world, this puzzle of contemporary art, it was enlightening to me to just find out how many people are not comfortable in talking about contemporary art, because there's just so many ways in which contemporary art conflicts with what we've been taught art should be.
Right. Nancy, I'm sorry to interrupt. Can you give us an idea of the attendance to the Docent?
Well, I did talks that were like, how many in the audience at one time, do you mean? I've done talks that were one person or a family.
Mm-hmm.
And I've done talks that were 50 or 60 people.
Right. Wonderful. Thank you. That's what I wanted to see, how much.
And we still do them, by the way. It's just not quite as busy as it was.
How do we get on a mailing list?
The Docent does not have a mailing list. You could just, the website's still up. And you could use the contact me button. I'm the mailing list. You want to talk about Docent, you talk with me. Because when you hit the contact me button or contact button, it's me that it comes to.
Sounds great.
And then I think this is my last slide, because the thing that I'm really quite involved in right now, Hamiltonian artists, where Tamora Wright left for, is an organization it's just got a wonderful mission, and I'm on the board of this one, to provide fellowships for quote unquote emerging artists. And they are artists of all ages. They're not just like kids. The fellowship gives all sorts of opportunities to learn about the business of art. Like if you're going to be a professional artist, all the sorts of things that you need to know, from insurance to taxes to how to do a grant proposal. And then one of the pieces that was missing was what's needed to help artists sustain a career. It's collectors. So this is the brainchild, not of me, but of the executive director of Hamiltonian. Her name is Lily Siegel. Kinetic. If you become a Kinetic member, and this is brand new, just kicked off very recently. We had the kickoff party like 2 weeks ago. If you're a Kinetic member, you get kind of a handheld introduction to art collecting. And you also have an opportunity to lease work, to rent it. So if you are a little shy about diving into art collecting,
numbers are going to be different, okay? The card numbers will be different.
I don't care. I just want a car.
maybe we could mute, make sure we're all muted. Thank you. The idea of renting, we thought would make it easier for people to have their first experience, perhaps as an art owner, live with it on your wall. And then if you do want to buy it, your rental fee gets applied to the cost of the work. And right now, all of the artists whose work is in the Kinetic program are all Hamiltonian fellows or alumni fellows. So I think that's it in terms of the slideshow. So Mariana, would you like me to stop it here and we could just chat?
Maybe we can open it up to discussion. Yes.
So should I stop screen sharing?
Do you have any other slides that were?
No, I think that's
okay.
it.
Yes, that's great.
Perfect.
I see some.
You can unmute.
There's questions in the chat. I think a lot of those are people are still here. So if you're here and you ask a question in the chat, feel free to ask it with your microphone, like Alexandra.
Hi, sorry guys, I've been muted and have no video because I am dyeing my hair. So you guys can just see that.
What color?
That's great.
Oh, just red. It's just, you know, self-care, that whole thing. So I guess I noticed that you don't have several places on the list. I guess like your list of like, I'm sorry, correct me if I'm wrong, but the list was about like local art galleries, basically.
Mm-hmm.
There's one that I just discovered a little while ago called Rhizome. It's in Tacoma Park.
Yeah, I'm aware of Rhizome.
Yeah, I'm just a huge fan, and they do like a lot of like really cool like music acts and stuff. I know music in particular is maybe not like super your thing, but it's really cool that they just have like everything there. I've actually talked with them about showing some of my work there. And I just really think it's cool. I don't know a ton about it. I kind of just discovered it, but I did hear that they're actually something about like they're going to move the entire building or something. They've been talking about it for a while, and it was just kind of like it's kind of a bummer to me because have you heard of a place called Lamont Street Collective? It was in Mount Pleasant.
Yeah, I know. I have not.
Okay, so I used to live there actually, and it's like a arts collective, I guess. And it doesn't really exist anymore because they got evicted. It used to be like the meeting place of the Socialist Party back in the 70s. And it just sort of over time turned into this like rent controlled arts and activism collective. And they had like, I think biannual art shows. They call it like Salon de Libertad. And I participated in that in the past because I mean, I lived there. Yeah, I've noticed that a lot of the art spaces, it seems like a lot of the like DIY art spaces in DC in particular just seem to be like kind of getting like almost like pushed out.
Mhm.
Yeah, I
That's
guess I'm
a
just kind of
huge
curious your thoughts about
issue.
that.
I
Yeah.
mean, that lack of well, studio space and opportunities for local artists to show is a huge issue, and was actually what made me very enthusiastic about Stable, the entity that has the below market studio spaces and the gallery. Yeah, because you're right. I mean, this is a huge issue and inhibits the ability of artists to live and work in this area because it's prohibitively expensive to
Yeah.
have decent studio space. There is a very interesting art collective that just recently coalesced in Kensington. So if you ever,
Oh, really? I live in Kensington.
So if you ever,
Ooh.
yeah, do you know where Pazzo Fine Art is?
No.
It's a new gallery in Kensington, and right across the street are, it's a warehouse that a bunch of artists took over and made some really beautiful studio space.
That is so cool. I had no idea there was anything like that in Kensington.
I didn't either. Yeah, that's great to know. Just-
Wow.
There's also that out of the way, is that what it's called? Out of the way studio?
Yeah, off the tracks gallery, out of the
Yeah.
way gallery. I
Yeah.
mean, there are places. That's one of the reasons I follow them all on Instagram, because they do exist. But Hyattsville, there are several,
Right.
like there's Otis Street. Today, O Street Galleries, 52 O Street's having an open house, which is where I'm going to go later when we're.
Wait, I'm sorry. What did you say about Otis Street?
Well,
I just used to live on Otis Street and
there's
Woodridge.
a ton of artist studios there.
Wow, that must have happened recently. I lived there back in like 2013, I think. And yeah,
No.
that's cool.
Penny, you wanted to ask something.
Yeah, I'm
Thank you,
curious.
Alexander.
First of all, I find it fascinating how you discovered your passion. It's obviously a passion. Art is obviously a passion and a love for you. I'm curious about your background. What is your educational background, or did you grow up in an art community, or
Not at all.
tell us about yourself?
I grew up in Jersey City, New Jersey, and then moved to New York. I have an undergraduate degree in history, modern European history, and I have a law degree, which is why I moved to DC. I was an attorney. Not anymore.
Nancy, didn't you also do a lot of stuff in women's a lot of activism and women's rights.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's where I did my career. I was a lobbyist for many of the national women's organizations. My area of particular concentration was health and reproductive rights. Not a happy situation right now.
Well, and I will say that Nancy and I met because we both had kids at the Washington Waldorf School, and we served on the board there and worked on projects together. And at some point towards the end of both our time there, she said to me, "Oh, I'm thinking of getting a graduate degree in art history." And it sort of came out of the blue. So I didn't know about the Barcelona thing, but then I don't know, sometime later she started sending me things, and I started running into her at things, and because it's also an interest of mine, but not nearly as deeply or as extensively as Nancy's. But and so I always say, when people say, "How did you hear about this?" I say, Nancy Hirshbein told me to come, and I do whatever Nancy Hirshbein tells me to do.
Well, that's a heavy responsibility.
But I've been with Nancy. We did a day trip to New York once, and Nancy does this periodically, and she is fierce. She goes with a list, and we literally for hours just went from gallery to gallery, and I just followed her and, took pictures and took notes. And so a lot of what I know I've learned from Nancy.
You should see
That's
my
wonderful.
Venice list.
I would like that. We should talk before I leave.
Yeah, I think you got our new consultant, Nancy, and Linda by extension too.
Oh, I'm always happy to say, share what's going on, or you could just follow me on Instagram or something.
Oh, that would be fun. Nancy has also kindly offered to take us on a tour of, or be our docent for a tour of somewhere in the Hirshhorn. So what I was thinking is we would poll members and see what dates might work for Nancy.
Right now we have an amazing exhibition called Put It This Way. 49 artists, all of whom are women and 2 non-binary artists.
That one.
And it is just so chock full of people that I never heard about,
right? But
should have.
We all should have.
And so this exhibition, and all of the work is top rate. I mean, there's nothing second rate in this show, but it was meant to be an illustration of the arbitrary filters that we've put on this creation of what we call the art historical canon. I mean, that it's as much a social construct as anything else. There's no objective criteria that's uniformly applied that went into the creation of this art historical canon, that so many women artists were excluded for one reason or another. And it's an opportunity to expose ourselves to not just the artists, but the problematic nature of the ways in which we think about art history.
Yes.
Nancy, do you think, I mean, my sense is that museums around the country and around the world are kind of going through a reckoning.
Absolutely. When it comes to women artists and Black artists, yeah.
Yes.
And yeah.
In fact, is it okay if I share my screen just on the one slide on the Guerrilla Girls? Yeah. Just to and I put it, I mean, this is a statement of the, I guess, Nancy, do they call themselves Guerrilla Girls? Wait, I'm gonna do from current slide. That's what I wanted to show, just to pique your interest.
So the Guerrilla Girls are, it's a collective. It started in the mid-'80s. I will tell you the origin story because it is absolutely infuriating. And I just, anyway, mid-'80s, there's an exhibition at MoMA organized by the legendary curator Kynaston McShine, who's just huge. And it is all the artists that that curator identified as the most important artists working at the time.
And I'll stop so we can.
And there were only like 3 or 4 women in the show.
Wow.
And they raised a stink. And Kynaston McShine said, if you weren't in the show, if I didn't choose you, just go get a day job, because you're not an artist and you didn't deserve to be in the show.
Whoa.
So the Guerrilla Girls formed. They, to this day, they are anonymous. It is a constantly shifting group because some of them have passed away. They wear gorilla masks whenever they're in public.
Like
so you
gorilla,
don't-
not
yeah.
garrilla.
Right. You don't know who they are.
Right.
And the work that Mariana shared was a leaflet, a poster. Their activism continues, but this is it's an interesting intellectual puzzle for me, that not only did they print posters, like offset print, like billions of them, and put them all over the city, but they also did fine art editions of those posters that were acquired by the museums that they were critiquing. Like MoMA has a portfolio, and the Hirshhorn has a portfolio. Library of Congress has a portfolio.
That's fascinating.
And the other thing I would mention, if you don't know about her, is Katie Hessel, the great women artist. And
Right.
she has a wonderful, you can find her on Instagram, which is how I originally found her, but she also has a podcast. And
I listened to that podcast.
I listen to it whenever it's on. And she started curating shows. She's now becoming quite famous, and she just came out with a book called The Story of Art, and you can't see it. The rest of the title is Without Men.
I have a quibble with that book because
Yeah.
I think that she has subscribed to the myth that Marcel Duchamp was not the author of Fountain.
Mhm.
But I disagree with that completely.
Yeah.
And we can talk about that another time.
We can, but what's interesting about, she's very young. She went to college and she studied art history, and she realized that she didn't know any women artists. She just could not name 20 women artists, and started researching that and did her paper on that. And then started the Instagram, and then started the thing. Now she just curated a show at the Caston in New York, and I went to it. And I was kind of a fangirl. I went up to her and said, how much I had learned from listening to her. She said, well, let me give you a tour. And she gave me a tour of her show, which was great. But so she now has like a regular article in The Guardian. She's sort of a rock star now, but you may not agree with everything she does, but she's bringing, and she's got a great newsletter too, that you can get, an email newsletter, and she'll list, I don't know if it's weekly or every other, but she'll list 5 shows in Britain, which is where she is, but then 5 shows around the world. And then she'll list women artists that I just discovered to go check out. And so it's a great resource.
Another resource in terms of women artists is a group called, I think, The Other Half. And they do the same thing. They will send you a weekly list of what's going on among women artists and institutions and shows.
Wow.
I have a question. That one is just inside the United States? or is international?
International.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
Because if you want to know about women artists, that are all over the place with thousands of newsletters, thousands of international museums all over the world.
Yeah. I think that I wanted to tell everybody that maybe if they send me or Jordan some questions they have for Nancy, especially about websites or linkages to newsletters, maybe I can put them together and at some point ask Nancy if I missed any, and to disseminate for everyone. We can proceed that way. And Nancy, this has been so wonderful. I'm not closing, but I'm saying that it rivaled our most attended sessions. So I'm very, very, very pleased. And
Well,
thank you to all who came. I don't want to close it off. I just want to alert people that we'll take questions also off the air, and I can route them to Nancy if she doesn't mind.
You want me to put my email in the chat?
Oh, that would be fantastic. Yes, then absolutely. If you don't mind, that would be fantastic.
I mean, anytime any of you want to ask a question or meet at the Hirshhorn or just whatever, you have my email address now.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. And shall we do another round to just make sure that anybody else who wanted to have questions? Or
Mariana.
Yes.
I'm
sorry, Jordan.
I just need to, Linda's had her hand raised for a while now, so.
Yeah.
Is that me?
Yeah, Linda?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Linda, sorry, I didn't notice.
I'm sorry. I'm in my car. This is so interesting. I had to pull over and stop. Anyway, I'm on the board of James Renwick Alliance. And we're always looking for, venues and artist talks and visits and all the time. So how could I or you send me, or we can connect?
I put my email address in the chat.
Yeah.
And when Mariana,
Yeah,
when
I can
she's
disseminate
recording
it.
this, she will have the chat download. So
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
let
Thanks
me,
a lot.
thank you so much. That's great. And thank you, Linda.
Thank
Sorry
you.
about that. I didn't.
Lovely.
I missed your hand.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments, wishes? I thank everybody. And Jordan, if you want to say anything, but I want to thank everybody for taking time from their Saturday morning, especially Nancy.
Oh, my
and
pleasure.
Linda,
Totally my pleasure.
and wish them a fabulous trip to the Venice Biennale and wherever else they go. But we want to have you back after a while, after you come back and have digested it. Maybe we'll have a little panel with the two of you if we can get you.
Ooh, that
and
would be fun.
Anybody else who we might think would make a good panelist. How do you
to talk about the Biennale?
Oh,
My
about
friend
the
Raluca.
Biennale, and yes, whatever you. I think that would be very interesting.
Yeah,
Not
I'd
to
love to
mention
see
that
photos,
Jordan
too.
goes to the Miami,
Oh,
Or you go to Art Basel?
Basel.
Yeah, we're going to be, I'm with Lenny Campello's group, so we're going down doing context again, so.
Excellent. It's a
So
lot of
maybe
fun
that
down
will
there.
be our panel, Lenny, you, Nancy, Linda, and
Susan
whoever else.
Hostetler is there now, I think, so.
Say it
So
again?
she's also, I'm sorry, Susan Hostetler, who also used to teach at the Yellow Barn. She's there now, or just on her way home, I think.
It went to the Venice or to the Miami.
She's in Venice right now, or she's on her way
Okay.
home.
Great.
Great.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, everybody. And,
Thank
and to
you.
be
I hope
continued.
you all have
by
a beautiful, artful day. It's
email. You do.
thank you.